We'll call the committee back to order in open session. We are continuing discussions relative to the topics that were listed. I have nothing to report at this time. We will be having additional meetings on those in the future. With that, we will now run to item 6B1, abolish one FTE DA investigator and create one FTE deputy sheriff position within the sheriff's office by way of interagency agreement between the district attorney's office and the sheriff's office. And before we go, Chair Gibbs had intended to be with us today, but he is traveling and his flight was delayed, so he could not join us remotely, and he is excused. I should have done that at the beginning of the meeting. So,
all right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be quick on this one. Short, the bottom line up front, you are not being asked that we put this, it's listed under action. We're not asking for action today. It's anticipated we'll have additional information for you next at your future meetings. The short story, the statutes allow for the DA's office to have an investigator position to assist in the work being done in that office, provided the county board creates such a position. You have historically. There have been some challenges with that position in terms of things like equipment, and they haven't historically had access to a law enforcement type squad or vehicle. There's not really a great supply of backup for that position. It's essentially a position of one. Recently, we've had more discussions about equipment and that squad being available or a transport vehicle being available because the DA's office has attempted to have that investigator take on some additional work with respect to the ideas of diversion and deflection transports. Credit to everyone that's been part of these conversations, from HR, the sheriff's office, DA's office. We've had corp counsel's office, administration. I think we've come up with a plan that will be a model. And in fact, that I've had conversations with the sheriff. I think it's going to be a model for the state moving forward. The idea is to put that position within the sheriff's office, abolish it within the DA's office, put it in the sheriff's office, and then have an interagency agreement, which is in your packet, that essentially allows for that special assignment, similar to what we have with the crisis assessment response team, or we have canine officers. There's an application process, a selection process where that individual then would serve in the district attorney's office. The interagency agreement, the draft that's currently in there gives you an idea of what that might look like. But again, we still need to make sure the costing, we flesh that out. It is going to be more expensive. Make no mistake, it's going to be more expensive. But from a risk mitigation standpoint, I think there's a lot of positives. On the HR side, in terms of kind of consistency of applicants, I think we get, we'll have better outcomes, but it is going to be, I anticipate, more expensive. But again, risk mitigation, I'll just give you one example. Policies, policy development, policy updates. Right now, you're a department of one. Yeah, okay. We'll bring it back next month, but that's the flavor. If you have questions, send me an email. I'll make sure we address them next time. Thank you, Chair.
I think we were going through the entire presentation, so sorry about that, but Chair Limmer, or Supervisor.
I'm not chair here, but was there a presentation already at Public Safety that, no, okay.
No.
The meeting was not held due to notice issues, so that's one of the reasons, and additional information will come. Next, we'll go on to the 2025 annual budget revenue and expense assumptions. I'll turn it over to Administrator Leonard. You have a resolution and the assumptions in your packet.
Okay, and I will go into as much detail as you want, but I know the hour is long. So you do have the resolution in your packet. Historically, we have had the county adopt revenue and expense assumptions. Sales, you'll see the sales tax assumptions, essentially keeping that flat. Our 2024 budget was pretty aggressive in terms of targets. I'll give you a quick sales tax update later in the presentation, but we're on pace to have, it looks like we'll have a little bit of an increase over last year, and hopefully take us to about 17 million, but which really is not a very robust cushion in case there's economic shutdown. So you'll see my suggestion, and of course you can change it, is there at 16 million. Just for history, we've used 3 million over the last, in this year's budget to service debt. 5.2 million or 5.339 million for shared revenue. That is based on the new shared revenue formula that was adopted in 2023, and a memo was put out by the Legislative Fiscal Bureau. It's a very slight increase over what we anticipate this year, about $120,000 increase. Utility aid, I kept the amount the same. You'll see that the estimate for 2024 is that 2.083. We have not received any of that money yet. We receive it in November. We should get updated preliminary numbers for next year by late August. Those preliminary numbers for late August will also correct any estimates from 2024. So we'll have more information there. Transportation aids, similarly, I put in a flat projection there. The reason for that is relatively simple. While we have been spending more, other counties have been as well, and it's a rolling average relative to what other counties are doing. Intergovernmental charges, the reason for those going up is that's when we're allowed to charge other governments for the work that we do, and we can build in the increased costs we have. It's an estimate, but I have those conversations with the departments. Best example, highway. We have a routine maintenance agreement with the state. We do work. They pay us the cost of that. But individual departments' budget and the programs they do really control that. Licenses and fees, same sort of idea. It's a placeholder, but the discussion is really within the individual department budget. Some fines and fees or licenses rather are set by the state. We don't get to increase the cost despite the fact that our costs might go up. I left public charges open. That's consistent with the conversation we had earlier that, I need some direction. I think it would be helpful to have some direction for when I have conversations with departments, or perhaps the standing committees have the discussions about, should we build in kind of that annual increase in terms of what we expect our public charges to be for the various services, or not? We have a lot of these conversations already. Parks, Rec, and Forestry has them through the Park Commission, which will then be incorporated in the budget in that fee appendix. But I did leave it open just in case you wanted to provide that direction there. Miscellaneous revenue is really interest and treasurer fees with the higher interest rates. We do get we're anticipating some benefit there. I put remaining ARPA balance with an approximate 2 million. I'll get you a firmer number at your upcoming meetings, but we did have some projects come in at lower cost. I just was having a conversation with Jerry this afternoon about it. And then also your broadband projects, we had a PSC grant application, public service grant application that the provider backed out of. They rescinded that, so we'll have more money available. And I also added at Chair Robinson's request a conduit bonding revenue line, anticipated revenue. We've been getting $100,000 annually from Bug Tussle based on the previous issuance of that up to 25 million. If you continue with the proposed issuance, that will go up. But right now we do have that in there. What we would be looking for, I think, moving forward, it would be good to have some direction from the county board and this committee relative to where do those funds go? Do they just go in the general fund, or do you set them aside as essentially a specific reserve in the event the conduit bonding, if they default, or if you want to use it for additional designated purposes? So that's on the revenue side. I knew that was faster than I probably would have went. Quickly through the expenditure side, salaries, you previously gave direction about 3%. Health insurance, won't belabor that point, went with the conservative 8. WRS, you'll see there's a little asterisk there. The WRS put out the Employee Trust Fund announced what the increases were for general employees and protective employees. We only have general and protective with Social Security. We do not have protective without. I only listed the employer side of the increases. There are corresponding employee side, but those are set by the trust fund. Dental increases 3%, workers' comp 2%, unemployment kept flat. Other insurance, this is a blended estimate. Our liability insurance, my understanding, our initial quote was up 7%, cyber insurance up 5%, property up 5%, and we still haven't gotten a firm response on auto, but it's somewhere between the 5 and 15%. So I put other insurance at 6%. Insurance is what it is. We have like Molly alluded to, it's an account unto itself. We have a chargeback model with respect to departments for some of those things. But that's where we are with respect to other insurance. Utility costs, again, a bit of a blended rate. Bless you. WPS has put in for an 8.5% electric increase in 25 and a 4.9% increase in 26. For gas, they have requested 6.8 increase for 2025 and 3.9 for 26. So that's why you'll see those utilities 6%. We did hear back from the city for water and sewer. They're not expecting any rate increases. That was the most recent information we heard from them relative to 2025. So, of course, these numbers are going to continue to get refined as more information comes in, but you've historically had those estimates come in. I'll let you know, net new construction, that's a big one. We don't get those estimates until later in the year in August. As soon as we get that, we'll bring that in so you know what your net new construction revenue is.
So we added both the ARPA balance, and one of the reasons I wanted that in there is because we're in the throes of the last months of our ability to obligate those funds. So we've got to keep that number in front of us and be adjusting that on a regular basis as we get some of the projects complete. So that's the first, it's not been in there in the past, but it's because we've got the December 31st drop dead date for obligation. And then we hadn't tracked the conduit bonding revenue, and I think it's important just to show that. And if we do the borrowing, it'll be 40 basis points of whatever. So if they go 12 million, we would see an increase of a few, 36,000?
Yeah, 25,000.
Yeah, yeah. So those are assumptions. Gail, or Supervisor Marshall, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The sales tax revenue, if we even put in like a 3% inflation, that's $480,000. Is that a reasonable amount to add to the 16 million? We are ahead of plan by 688,000 to date.
I think that's entirely up to the county board as to what you think is reasonable. Again, how you use sales tax in Marathon County, I think is other counties have followed suit. So, let's see if I can. You have historically been more conservative in your estimates than we've been recently. So you'll see in last year we were projecting 16.9. We adopted a budget with $16 million of revenue. So we did come in $900,000 over. Or I'm sorry, actually it was less than that. You'll see when you look in the budget. But we are on pace to hit, I would say, probably around 17 million. If to your point, Supervisor Marshall, we continue to have similar performance through the rest of the year, that $1 million essentially rolls into your CIP in the year following the audit. So it limits your need to borrow for capital projects following the year in which the revenue is received. The tighter we budget there, just like the tighter we budget for our operating budget, where we have less of a surplus at the end of the year, Marathon County's policies have historically been that in the year following the audit, it goes to negate CIP. So you could absolutely do that. The risk is, one, if you actually, just say you just have a small amount of excess, you have less rolling into CIP. The real risk is if we have economic downturn and you have budgeted let's just make it for simple math. Say we do $3 million in debt service again, and the other 13 million is general operating, which is property tax relief, and you take in less than 16, you're either going to cut services or use your general fund reserve or some other funding source to service debt or to provide those services. So, we borrowed from St. Croix on their budget process. I will say St. Croix borrowed our this sales tax process and the CIP rollover from Marathon County. I think that as your administrator, my sense is be reasonable. Don't be 25% low, but being 10% low, that's St. Croix's approach, is they try to be 10% below estimates for sales tax for that exact reason. Of course, the board can change that.
I'd just like to point out that in 2024, we've had, looking at the 4 years, we've had 3 months with the lowest sales tax collections over that 4-year period in January, April, and June, and 3 months with the highest in the 4-year. So it's really been variable, and I don't know why that is, but it's a little concerning when you start having 3 months with below the 4-year average, or the lowest of the 4 years. But other comments or thoughts on the assumptions? Do we want to have a goal for public charges for the other committees? 1%, 2%, 3%? If we're paying our employees more, do we want to try to recover that through those charges? And some of them are set by statute, so we can't, or some of them may be regulated, but what are your thoughts? We've sort of put 1.5 for intergovernmental fines licenses. Do we want to put an amount in and then encourage, if they overachieve, that's great. But we don't have a value in there. Supervisor Marshall.
I would think that we would want to make it similar to our salary increase, which isn't the highest of our estimated expenditure increases, but it's kind of middle of the road. So something in the neighborhood of 3%.
And I'll just tell you, I'm certainly not going to take a different opinion. I think this is the direction you provide. I would then, for my position would be to work with the departments when we come in for our individual budget meetings to talk about, hey, work with your committees. This was the direction from HR Finance to evaluate whether or not 3% is appropriate. And then it would work through the standing committees is my hope. I don't know that I was overly clear before, but work through their process to evaluate those fees. And like I said, I know solid waste is going to be having those conversations, certainly.
Thoughts? Others? I know this is catching some of you, it's new. And it's an assumption. It sort of it gives him, the Administrator Leonard, sort of the direction on how he approaches the budget in the context of revenues available in framing, so they use these numbers and they'll increase salary line by 3% going in with the department heads, and there's some variability in there, and those will get plugged in, and it just helps set the tone for the discussions with the department heads to ultimately shape the budget. Any thoughts? If not, we need to advance this to the county board. Without any other discussion, would anybody like to make a motion? And we would need to address the issue of public charges. Supervisor Lemmer.
I think 3% seems kind of high. I don't know if I'm right on this, but that seems like public charges end up being kind of a regressive tax that disproportionately impact poor people. I don't know what number to pick, though, because we don't have any data to know if we're in the ballpark or not on some of these. So it's hard to say, is 3% high or low? I don't know.
Supervisor Marshall.
My only point was that all of our revenues are relatively flat, and yet all of our expenses are up significantly, and that makes for a high increased tax levy. So either we need to be more aggressive on our revenue, or we have to cut back on our expenditures, because our net new construction is probably not likely to be that robust. Would that be a good characterization, Administrator Leonard?
Well, I'm hoping our net new construction is as robust as last year. Certainly, we did. I think we were the 9th highest, which is good in the state. My sense on, again, how I would have the conversation on public charges is it's a conversation. To your point, the decision of this committee is not, what you put in here is not going to be applied across the board unless the county board actually, unless you adopt that. You're going to have another opportunity to have those conversations. I can tell you, I know there are some public charges that are going to go up substantially more than 3%. I have absolute confidence. And I have similar confidence some won't. But it'll be some guidance that, hey, we want department heads to give some consideration to what are our true costs of delivering these services. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's the county board on what does that mix look like. You might have a public charge, to your point, Supervisor Lemmer, that you said, hey, there's a public good here that justifies maybe holding it flat. Or there, hey, this is really a user fee that is benefiting the user, as opposed to some generalized public good where maybe it goes up more than, or there's an expectation if it's a run like an enterprise fund, that it should cover operations. I'll pick the Regional Forensic Science Center moving forward. There's public good, but my expectation is we're going to be charging our customers, other counties, a cost that covers our cost of doing business. So I know that's not a great answer to you. What do I think? But some direction. I didn't want to just put a number in there that I came up with. I wanted you to have this conversation, and I knew it was going to be messy. The answer is, I have no doubt it depends based on what the service is. You might make a determination for, like, to use the landfill as an individual customer, maybe. And that conversation is going to happen at solid waste and then at ERC, but your approach might be different. And that's why that appendix of all of the fees, my hope is that it's more helpful for you than taking them piecemeal.
Any other discussion or motions? Supervisor Poole.
What is the increase of the cost of the services? Shouldn't it reflect that?
And that too would depend, right? If you have if we're delivering a service out at the landfill, for example, where fuel and all the operational expenses are substantially increasing. Again, it's going to be an individual determination. That's why I didn't just throw a number in. It's going to be a conversation with departments and then recommendations through the standing committees to set those fees, and hopefully through the budget and approval of the appendix as well. Short answer to your question is yes, it will depend.
And this is one I anticipate we might revisit at our next meeting, because we may have a little bit more, but it would be nice to get something in the packet. And we can amend it. The problem is we meet the day of the county board meeting. We can update the ARPA funds and other things and at that time, but it would be nice to get something out in advance for the supervisors to focus.
Is the 3% number Supervisor Marshall cited reasonable? I mean,
So what I would need is to advance the resolution and the assumptions to the county board, and you can fill in the public charges, but that's what we need today, and we can again revisit it and then amend it based upon what we do at the next meeting. But I think what we've heard from the county board is they like to see something in, and we can tweak it at the last minute based upon better information.
I mean, to your question, I mean, I think Supervisor Marshall largely I'm going to echo what she said. You see what our expenses are doing. I mean, I referenced what WPS is applying to the Public Service Commission for increased costs. Cost increases are happening all over the place. IT costs for software, we're doing things to mitigate those, but costs are going up. You all feel it every time you go to anywhere.
But, you know, one of the only item in here that troubles me a little bit is the utility cost. And the 6%, that assumes that we don't have an energy conservation or utilization reduction. And is there an opportunity for us to lower that, understanding that the prices are going to go up higher, but is a way of forcing departments and others to look at energy savings approaches relative to our utilization of electricity and gas?
Short answer again to that is yes. I think there's some policy changes that we could take through the county board. I mean, one thing Chris and I talked about was you see other entity. I mean, you reduce hours of access to the public. Other places are doing it. And if you close half days on Friday, your heat, your electrical, all those things go down. We do serve the public in a lot of other ways. We had this conversation last year. I think there are some opportunities there. We have done a lot on the energy conservation side relative to LED bulbs. We're doing chiller replacements that should bring costs down, and the library project is a great example. So we're doing those things. I put in an assumption. I will fine tune that, of course, with Chris when we look more at our, when we get more closer to the actual budget building. We have to, if we can get rid of some of those excess properties too that we've talked about, you know, as we get out of Thomas Street and as we get out of River Drive. Second part of that is being able to truly get out of those facilities should bring down the footprint size.
So what are your wishes? Supervisor Lemmer?
Can we send this forward with nothing in that box, or do we need to fill it with a number?
I think my preference would be to fill it in with a number, and we can change it at the next meeting, but you can leave it blank. But I don't know how that, my recommendation would be fill it. I guess I can make a motion as the chair, so I would move that we advance the assumptions, putting 3% increase in public charges and reducing the utility cost increases to 4.5%. Seconded by Supervisor Lemmer. Any discussion? Any discussion? Not all those in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. That motion carries. All right. Audit update and sales tax update.
All right, you're stuck with me for the rest of these as well. So we did, as was alluded to by Supervisor Hart, some of the challenges we have had with Workday relative to the audit have been relative to Workday. We've made a lot of good progress since, and quite honestly, the team in finance have done a really exceptional job. Christy, her last day was kind of the end of last month, and her team have really done a good job since she left as well. We closed out some of those grant items which were problematic. We're continuing to work with the auditor, Baker Tilly, to get the requisite items done. They made a lot of progress on finalizing our cash numbers, and things are moving forward in accordance with what we kind of would have expected. Had a good meeting with the auditor this week, and in fact, in my conversation with them last week, they conveyed that we're actually ahead of where we were last year at this time in terms of schedule, which made us all think back to how challenged we were last year. But things are moving along, and as soon as we do have that final audit report, we'll make sure Baker Tilly is in front of the committee. But I don't have a substantive update other than to say things are progressing as we would have hoped.
All right. And when will we see the presentation anticipated?
I didn't ask that to John Rader, but I can ask that. We can get that information for you and have it presented at your next meeting. The audit itself, the state filing deadline is July 31st for us to have that. And then there is a annual schedule of expenditures for federal and state awards. Some more work has to be done on that again in August before it's due in September. But my anticipation would be I can certainly have a date for John Rader from Baker Tilly to appear in front of the committee. I'll have that date by your next meeting.
Any questions on the audit? All right, sales tax. I think we sort of covered that.
Yep, it's in your packet. If you have any specific questions, happy to try to answer them, but I think all of the Supervisor Marshall reference, we are a little bit ahead of target, assuming all other things stay equal. But as Chair Robinson referenced, it's been a volatile sales tax year. I've actually had conversations with my colleagues where other counties are having similar experiences. I don't know why, but when you're down 15% in month one in January from year previous, and then you're up 4, 3, and then you're essentially flat, it's interesting. The end of the year is really where a lot of sales tax comes in as well, which isn't surprising, right? You have the holidays and people have a lot of sales tax eligible spending.
Any questions? If not, we will move on to the next meeting. We will have another full discussion. But we've been paring items back, if you can believe it, and pushing them off because we still have the conduit bonding, we still have the committee work plan, we have a number of things that we've carried over, we still have negotiations with the law enforcement. So we will have a full agenda. Does anybody have any priorities or specific items that they'd like to see come in at the next meeting? Otherwise, we'll prepare the agenda based upon information available to us to discuss in a meaningful manner and those that are time sensitive. All right, a motion to adjourn would be in order. Moved by Supervisor Marshall, seconded by Supervisor Poole. All those in favor of adjournment will signify by saying aye. 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 Opposed, no. That motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you. I can go home and grab my material for the next meeting. Go home and hopefully work out for a walk.